Friðr, old heathen concept or 20th century invention. The notion of friðr will evoke a thought of inviolable kinship in any modern heathen who considers themselves to be well-read. Indeed, it is commonplace to find the notion that friðr is something that only exists between kinsmen, and, to quote the sentiments of many modern sources, means something more or deeper than just peace. Is this idea grounded in reality? Where did this idea come from, and does it have any basis in the lore? In this video, we'll be discussing friðr from the historic sources where it can be found, and a modern work that has greatly influenced how the concept is used today, and whether or not that influence is actually valid. Hello everyone, my name is Gavin, and this is the Heathen Household. We are super excited to be doing this video on friðr, and we hope that you enjoy it. But before we can get into theory and theology, it's important that we get into the facts. Friðr can just mean peace. Inherently, in and of itself, friðr can be just as shallow as peace between people. This is seen in Egil's Saga, where King Olaf is asked by the messengers to allow them to go back to King Ethelstan to see if he would pay more money for peace, or in the Invention Saga, as you can see here. As we can see, friðr can very much simply refer to peace between groups of people. Now that we've dismissed a common misconception, we have to ask the most important question that will either preserve or destroy modern heathenry's idea of friðr. Can it mean more than just peace? Before we answer that question, we have to first understand just where the idea came from, that friðr refers to a sense of reciprocal inviolability between kin or people of a community. It does not inherently come from the lore, because the lore provides no such actual, explicit usage of the word friðr in that context, but rather from a Danish cultural historian known as Vilhelm Grønbech and his work, Culture of the Teutons. In this work, Grønbech defines friðr in this manner. Friðr is the state of things which exists between friends, and it means, first and foremost, reciprocal inviolability. However individual wills may clash in a conflict of kin against kin, however stubbornly individual heads may seek their own way according to their quota of wisdom, there can never be a question of conflict save in the sense of thoughts and feelings working their way towards an equipoise in unity. We need have no doubt that good kinsmen could disagree with fervor, but however the matter might stand, there could and must inevitably be but one ending to it all, a settlement peaceable and for making peace. Friðr. Grønbech clearly has a different interpretation of the notion of the word friðr than many of the later sagas seem to provide, and gives his reasoning for this different interpretation in the paragraph preceding his definition. If we want a real understanding of such men as Egil, we are driven to ask, what is the hidden force that makes kinsmen inseparable? First, we learn that they call each other friend, frandi in Icelandic, frund in Anglo-Saxon, and a linguistic analysis of this word will teach us that it means those who love each other. But this brings us no farther, for etymology tells us nothing of what it is to love. We can perhaps get a little nearer by noting the etymological connection between the word friend and two others that play a great part in the social life of those days, free and friðr. In friðr, peace, we have the old kinsman's own definition of the fundamental idea in their interrelationship. By friðr, they mean something in themselves, a power that makes them friends, one towards another, and free men towards the rest of the world. Even here, of course, we cannot take the meaning of the word directly for granted, for the centuries have not passed unscathing over that little word. Words such as horse and cart and house and kettle may remain more or less unaltered throughout the vicissitudes of culture, but terms used to designate spiritual values necessarily undergo a radical change in the course of such spiritual transformations as have taken place in the souls of men in the North during the past 1,000 years. And the nearer such a word lies in its origin to the central part of the soul, the more sweeping changes it will undergo. If ever a word bore the mark of a transforming influence of Christianity and humanism, it is this word, friðr. If we look closely into the older significance of the word, we shall find something sterner, a firmness that has now given place to weakness. The friðr of early days was less passive than now, with less of submissiveness and more of will. It held also an element of passion, which has now been submerged in quietism. But the word tells us indisputably that the love which knit these kinsmen together is not to be taken in a modern sentimental sense. The dominant note of kinsmanship is safety, security. Grønbech in this paragraph argues for friðr meaning something deeper than just peace, and proclaims that the word has also been diluted over time as the spiritual heart of Scandinavia began to change and weaken with the coming of Christianity and Roman sentiment. This is, needless to say, an extremely bold claim. To say that a word that we can with certainty say means peace is actually a much deeper, more connective concept is nothing short of bold. The question then, now seeing the claim and origin of the claim of friðr being some inviolable concept between kin and friends now laid bare, becomes one that we can finally begin to answer. Is Grønbech's claim grounded in fantasy and romanticization of the arch-heathens, or was Grønbech correct? In order to determine this, we should take a look at instances where friðr was used in ways that did not simply imply peace, as it had in the examples above. Two notable examples of friðr extending beyond the notion of just peace can be seen in the Havamal. Stanza 51 uses the term friðr in a way that is regularly translated as friendship, as it refers to the state between two men identified therein as vinum, or friends. This shows us that friðr can be used to denote friendship, as the regular reading of peace does not contextually make sense in a stanza dealing with the ending of friendship. Stanza 90 of the Havamal also uses the word friðr in a way that does not contextually make sense with it reading as peace, in that it references a distrustful woman's inclination towards oneself by using friðr to mean love or faithfulness, through reading the subsequent context that essentially says that the love of a distrustful woman is comparable to many things that one should also not trust, that it is dangerous. These two examples appear to show that friðr can mean more than just peace. It can also mean interpersonal relationship between two people. In fact, nowhere in the Codex Regius itself is the word friðr ever used in a context where peace would be its reasonable translation. This appears to give credence to Grønbech's idea that friðr once meant something deeper than peace, especially given that the Poetic Edda, the Havamal included, is thought to be older in composition than the Sagas themselves that would see friðr read as just peace. But where, now we must ask, is there any sense of inviolability? Does this second concept hold up as well as the first, or does it fail to be provable? For this, we will need to begin by looking at Grønbech's own given examples to see if, in context, these examples actually show us any sense of inviolability between family members or friends. In the Sigurtharkvitha in Skamma, we learn that Sigurd is slain by Guthorm under the direction of Hogni and Gunnar, the brothers of Gudrun, wife of Sigurd. The two brothers convinced Guthorm to commit the deed because he alone did not swear any oaths to Sigurd due to his age, whereas they had sworn their oaths and became blood brothers to Sigurd. In a strange and somewhat roundabout way, this proves that the notion of friðr as Grønbech's idea of inviolable peace and non-violence between kin is correct. Gunnar and Hogni could not take up arms against Sigurd directly because of their oaths, and had to convince someone else to kill Sigurd in their stead. And even then, the former had convinced the latter under the direction of a most jealous Brynhild. This sense of inviolability comes out fiercely in Hogni's protest of the deed, his praise of Sigurd, and his later cursing of Brynhild for having convinced Gunnar to orchestrate the deed. While capable of a sideways power-grabbing maneuver, we must admit that there is some societal force that stopped the two men from simply murdering Sigurd outright, and through the source itself, we can see that it was their blood-sworn kinship. We can find a parallel to this in the binding of Loki in the prose ending of the Lokasenna, where Odin isn't said to have taken his vengeance against Loki for Loki's deeds against his son Baldur. In fact, the only individual actually mentioned having taken action against Loki, aside from the gods in plural, in the Lokasenna was Skadi, likely for his pivotal part in the death of her father, Thiazi. Pairing this with the fact that earlier in the Lokasenna, Odin immediately gave Loki a seat in Egil's hall at the expense of Odin's son Vidar, when reminded of their blood oaths to each other that made them blood brothers in the first place, we easily get the impression that the same force that stayed Gunnar and Hogni's hands also stayed Odin's own. Consequently, if we examine the situations, this also reinforces the idea that acting through someone else wasn't necessarily considered to violate the oaths of kinship. Gunnar and Hogni used Guthorm to circumvent their oaths, Odin used the gods, and Skadi to circumvent his own. Another example Grønbech uses comes from the Reykdala Saga og Vigaskutur, where Vemund, the careless and brash nephew of Askell, constantly finds himself in dire straits and is constantly bailed out by the latter. Askell did not agree in any way with the actions of Vemund in the saga, reproving Vemund several times for his actions, but this did not stop Askell from continuously coming to the aid of Vemund every time he asked for his assistance, even when it led to the death of Askell. Unto death, Askell was bound to assist Vemund even though he was entirely displeased at having to do so. This, if nothing else, speaks to a sense of inviolability. One can absolutely disagree with one's kinsmen, but one appears to be required to support them even if it means one's own death. one may be tempted to ask if Vemund violated this inviolable relationship with Askell through his own deeds and actions, but we must answer this with a resounding no, as we've established that by proxy harm or causal harm does not appear to violate oaths or this societal binding force that we're calling friðr, and so the annoyance and collateral damage of which was slight, incurred by Askell up unto his death, was in fact not a violation of friðr. This begs the question, how far does something like this go? What is the theoretical limit, if any, to Grønbech's old friðr? To stretch the idea of being bound to the societal force to its very limits, we must again take a look at the Atlakvitha in the situations of Gudrun, Gunnar, and Hogni, as well as the lore surrounding the death of Baldur, to find the answer to our newest burning question. How much harm can be done to someone before friðr is violated, and that person is no longer bound to it? In the situation of Gudrun, it is almost inconceivable that she should still be bound to her brothers in light of their having murdered her husband Sigurd, but yet she is still compelled to avenge their deaths upon her husband at the time, Atli, who fascinatingly blamed the two for the suicide of Brynhildr, the sister of Atli, once again showing friðr in action. This conveys layers of friðr. Gudrun certainly owed friðr to Sigurd through marriage vows, just as Hogni and Gunnar owed them to Sigurd for their vows of brotherhood. But the friðr she owed Sigurd was less than what she owed her brothers. Effectively, this proves that blood relations are considered more important than other types of relations, proven yet again with Atli's vengeance against Hogni and Gunnar, of whom were now his oath-bound kin after Gudrun married him, for the death of Brynhild. It seems, then, that not even an exceptionally grievous act against someone that isn't directly harming the individual is not enough to constitute breaking friðr. After the death of Gudrun's brothers, however, Gudrun was able to exact revenge on Atli by killing their children and killing Atli himself. It is not believed that friðr extended to children, however, because the act of culling excess children and killing children was incredibly common. Please see the source below for this information. There is, however, an example of friðr potentially having been broken and wrongs made right in the death of Baldur. The death and subsequent avenging of Baldur appears to be one of the only acceptable instances of friðr being broken and restored in the killing of Holdr, the blind god in the Völuspá. To sum the event up, Loki tricked Holdr into shooting a missile of mistletoe at Baldur. Mistletoe is the only plant that Frigg did not make swear an oath of harmlessness to Baldur during the festive event where the gods were testing Baldur's invincibility due to Frigg's oath-taking of all things to be harmless towards Baldur. Mistletoe did not swear this oath to Frigg because it was too young, which draws an interesting parallel to Guthorm's situation in the Atlakvitha. This, as can be expected, was devastating to Baldur, as the mistletoe did not make an oath of harmlessness and, like the famous Sigurd, Baldur was killed. The gods initially blamed Holdr for this event, and Odin, with the Jotun Rindir, sired Vali, who then, on his first day of life, killed Holdr in retribution for the death of Baldur. This is one of the few, if not the only, examples of direct kinslaying being permissible under Grønbech's old friðr, done so to avenge the act of kinslaying itself. So with that in mind, it appears that the only way to break friðr is to cause direct harm to one's own kin, and only then is it permissible for them to take necessary steps to right the wrongs done to them. It is important to note, however, it is not understood if Vali having killed Holdr was an act that could have broken friðr due to Vali's age. Vali was, after all, only a day old when he committed this act. If the act of infanticide was not considered friðr breaking, it is potentially possible, even if somewhat strange and not applicable to human life, that fratricide by an infant could also be permissible. This is, however, speculative in nature. In summary, we have clearly proved the existence of Grønbech's old friðr and solidified it within the realm of the heathen worldview, using the works of the arch-heathens to flesh out an understanding of this complex social system. In addition, we have explored the idea that friðr is a ringed system, with friðr being owed more to some than to others, to both blood relations and oath-bound individuals. And we have lastly identified how friðr can be broken, and that is through direct harm to the person or property to whom one owes friðr. And with this, we can go forward and apply friðr in its true and most pure form as Reconstructionist heathens. We hope that you guys found this to be an interesting video. It was absolutely one that was interesting to research. We love looking at modern academic works and seeing whether or not they actually stand the test of looking at the lore. And in this instance, Grønbech was spot on. What do you guys think about friðr? What do you think about Grønbech's work? Let us know in the comments section below. My name is Gavin, from our heathen household to yours. Don't forget to like if you found this video useful and subscribe for more content like this, and we'll see you in our next video.